we have a new Unearthed Arcana, but this is a big one. This has to do with the Player's Handbook that is coming out in a couple of years. So where do we begin? We begin with Origins, right?
Appropriately enough, we begin at the beginning. And so this Unearthed Arcana is the first in what's going to be a series of Unearthed Arcana articles that come out every month or so over the course of not only the next year, but probably the next year and a half or so, where we're going to present different pieces of the Player's Handbook, but with brand new content, then also familiar content, but with new elements, updates, and this is the chance for D&D fans to let us know what they think, to really lend their voice to the chorus of D&D fans that will be really letting us know where they want us to go next with this game that many of us have been playing for decades, and so many people have been playing since the 5th edition Player's Handbook came out in 2014. And so, with this first one, we thought, why not start at the start? And that is figuring out where your character in D&D, where did they come from? And so when we say your character origin, that's what we're talking about. What in your backstory helped shape who you are and was formative for you before you became an adventurer? Your adventuring life is largely expressed by your character class. And so character classes we'll get to in some upcoming Unearthed Arcana articles. In this one, we're going to be looking at three main elements that together express who you were in the earliest stages of your life. And that is your character's race, your character's background, as well as whatever feat that you get as part of that background. Because yes, one of the new things here, which some of our recent D&D books have already signaled was coming, and many fans have already guessed coming, that everyone's background will now give them a first level feat. But we'll talk more about feats, I think, a little later in the video.
So to begin, since this is about origins, let's start with race.
So your character's race in D&D represents your ancestry in many ways. When you make your character, you decide, is your character a member of the human race or one of the game's fantastical races? Various race options have appeared in many of our books over the last 8 years. Now is our time, in this Unearthed Arcana, to revisit our old friends, the races that are in the Player's Handbook. And so here, we're going to be able to look at, all of us together as D&D fans, the latest versions of humans, elves, dwarves, and others. Many familiar aspects of those races are still here. Many of the traits that people have been using for the last 8 years, they're right here on the page. But then there are also new traits. And some of those traits that we've been all using in our characters have new options. Great example of this. In the dwarf, you still have stone cunning. But now, a dwarf, as long as they're in contact with stone in some way, whether they're standing on it, touching it, dwarves now, a certain number of times per day, can give themselves tremor sense, meaning they can sense through the earth itself if there are creatures nearby, moving objects. We're really leaning into the mythic stories of each of the race options in the game and looking for ways to make them sort of the version truest to themselves. Like something that we would talk about while working on them is we want this dwarf to be the dwarfiest dwarf.
Right.
We want the elf to be the elfiest elf. And so we've been looking at ways of not only maintaining continuity with what sort of the general silhouette of that race option is in the 2014 Player's Handbook, but again, bring some new elements to the foreground. give you some more fun things that you'll be able to do during play. So that's another element. People are going to see in the races that ones that maybe in the past didn't have an active ability, something they could do during play, now they might have one. And so the dwarf's tremor sense is an example of this. Now the dwarf has something that they can use that makes them feel dwarfy and will have usefulness in adventures, while also having some of the familiar traits that they had before. The resistance to poison, for instance,
Right.
still here.
I love the narrative hook of that, just because if you're a miner, if you are a tunnel digger, like in a war, you are extremely sensitive to vibrations.
Yes.
You're just ultra aware all the time. So that's perfect for that playable race.
Exactly. And you will get to see things like that in all of them, where we took something that was there before, and often it's just we turned up the volume. What can we do to this to make it even more fun? Give a new dimension of play for people as they play their dwarf, their halfling, their gnome, what have you. In some cases, there are also options where before there were none. One example I'm really excited about is if you play a tiefling, you now have several really interesting choices. Choices that we began exploring years ago in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and now lean into here in this UA for the Player's Handbook, and that is when you create a tiefling, you decide what your infernal legacy is. I'm sorry, your fiendish legacy. And one of those options is infernal, but your legacy also might be abyssal, or a new third option, which we're calling chthonic, which has to do, each of these options has to do with different lower planes. And so infernal means your legacy is connected to lawful evil planes. If you pick chthonic, it's neutral evil planes. And if you pick abyssal, chaotic evil planes. Now, of course, the tiefling's moral outlook is not connected to the sort of origin of their mystical powers, which are shaped, those powers, by this choice. So if you want the tiefling you have already in the 2014 Player's Handbook, choose the infernal legacy, and you're going to see you have the familiar abilities, although you have a little more now. Because now, in addition to the magical abilities you had before, you now also have the firebolt cantrip, because you're going to be able to hurl fire thanks to the legacy that you have.
Because that's very much the fire and the pits and the flames are basically what evokes that type of setting for anything infernal.
Exactly. Whereas if you pick abyssal, you have a completely different set of spells that you have in you innately, and then also your damage resistance is different. So infernal tieflings have the resistance to fire that tieflings have in the 2014 Player's Handbook, whereas abyssal and chthonic tieflings have other damage resistances. This sort of structure of giving you choices that maybe you didn't have before is something you'll see in a variety of places, not only in this Unearthed Arcana, but in future ones as well. Now, there's another fun choice that tieflings will have that they didn't have before, and it's also a choice that humans have in this Unearthed Arcana, and that is their size. If you are a human or a tiefling, you're now going to be able to decide whether you are medium, as they are in the 2014 Player's Handbook, or small. Because first off, in the real world, there are humans who are small. And so we want to make sure that's now an option in the game as well. And when it comes to tieflings, we added that option because some of the game's iconic fiends are actually quite little.
Yeah.
and so we thought, how fun would it be to see more height variance in tieflings? A theme then that we carry over into a brand new race that is also in this Unearthed Arcana. Would you like to talk about the...
Yes, I would love to.
So,
These are very unique.
yes, so in this Unearthed Arcana, we introduce a race that we're calling the Ardlings. Ardlings are also a people of the Outer Planes, like Tieflings, and like Aasimar, who appear in Monsters of the Multiverse. And Ardlings are associated with 3 different groups of upper planes. You'll see there's a parallelism here. Tieflings are associated with sort of the 3 main segments of the lower planes. Ardlings are associated with the 3 main segments of the upper planes. They can be small or medium, just like Tieflings, and all of their abilities are themed around, the heavens and whatnot, but also visually, they are really going to stand out, because one thing that sets Ardlings apart from, say, their Aasimar cousins is they all have the face of an animal. And what we're doing here is we're really leaning into the fact that going all the way back to first edition, many of the game's Celestials don't actually look like angels. Many of the game's Celestials from the game's long history, and I'm thinking here of Gardenals, Hound Archons, many of the avatars of specific gods, many gods themselves in not only D&D's pantheons,
But general mythology.
yes, but also in human mythology, have the visages of animals. And so that is true of the Ardlings, where when you make one of these folk who can trace their lineages to the upper planes, you also decide what animal appearance you have, whether you're a bear or a lion or a cat or an eagle. That is going to make it so that when you're walking down the street, people are going to know there's something special about you, especially when you then also temporarily sprout your spectral wings to go on short little bouts of flight. So this will also be the first time that we have introduced a race with limited flight in the player's handbook.
Right, and we saw that in a previous UA as well, but yeah, this limited flight, because flight is an interesting thing.
Yes, and this flight definitely is just for little bouts, because the Ardlings do not have physical wings all the time, but they can channel their connection to the upper planes to temporarily have these luminous wings that they use to maybe reach a hard to reach place. I like to imagine that some of them, especially with their animal features, might sometimes just use this ability to get that cat stranded up there in the tree.
Yeah, nothing nefarious.
Right. Although just as Tieflings determine their own moral compasses, this is true of Ardlings as well. So just because Grandma might have been from Mount Celestia doesn't mean your Ardling shares the moral outlook of that plane. So you could play a sinister Ardling, and I think it would be quite interesting to see that in people's games in the years ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm already going to. I'm playing a bat Ardling 100%. You have unleashed my humanoid bat fantasy already unknowingly, so I'm very excited for this.
And I can't wait to find out if your bat Ardling is from the exalted, heavenly, or idyllic legacy.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, no, that will require some thought.
Yeah, and because just as in the Tiefling, that choice then gives your character different magical abilities themed to the sort of group of planes that your character's legacy is connected to.
So one of the races that is included right from the get is in the player's handbook for 2024, presumably, is the Orc.
So the Orc is another new race for the player's handbook that appears here. And people who have Monsters of the Multiverse will see this Orc is the Orc from that book. And we've decided that because for many, many years the Orc has been playable, it's long past time for the orc to graduate to the player's handbook.
Right.
And
so many people play them.
yes, and take their place next to this other cast of characters. So I'm excited that orcs are now going to be there in the game's core rulebook.
But man, tieflings got there first. We also have backgrounds, and backgrounds have become so much more important than they were before.
Yes, and not only more important, but also more customizable than they've ever been before.
And more narrative weight.
Yes.
Like this is an important fact. It's super important about your character.
Exactly. And this emphasis on narrative is something that people will also see glimmers of also back in the race section of the same UA, because something that we offer to players now officially, this is something people have been doing in their games for many years, in a sort of story space between your race choice and your background choice, we encourage you to consider the possibility that your character might have parents of different humanoid kinds. One parent might be a dwarf, the other one might be a halfling. One parent might be a human, and the other one might be an orc. Some of these pairings the game has embraced in the past. We're now opening it up to encourage people to realize many pairings are possible, and when you do it, what you do is you choose one of those, basically you choose the parent that gives your character your game traits,
Right.
but then you can mix together the visual qualities of the two to determine how your character looks. And so you have two options to draw from for the aesthetic of your character, and then again you choose which one is giving you your special traits, your character's size, and speed, that sort of thing.
And like you said, players have been doing this for so long. Like my own wife plays a gnome, half goblin, a noblin.
Right.
Like this is very common. You just have to choose the stats that you want to go with.
Right. Yeah. And so again, another example of us providing new ways of experiencing the game we're all already playing. So now let's go from that to then the backgrounds.
Yeah, let's get into the backgrounds.
And backgrounds are really exciting for me because of how we essentially deconstructed them into their component parts, examined each part, and then reassembled them. And so the first thing that people are going to see is that the default option now for your background is to build your own. In the 2014 Player's Handbook, we had a bunch of backgrounds you could choose from. And then we had a rule that said if you want to customize a background, here's how you do it. Mm-hmm. We've essentially kind of reversed the priority order, where now the default is build your own background, and we tell you exactly how, or choose one of the sample backgrounds that we provide that were built using the rules that we just gave you for building a background. And so what those rules include are some choices for your character that can be very meaningful for you, not only in terms of your character's story, but also in terms of your character's abilities. Because, first off, speaking of abilities, one of your choices in background is where you're going to put a floating +2 and a +1 to your ability scores. Mm-hmm. People are already familiar who've been playing D&D with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, as well as some of our other recent books like Monsters of the Multiverse that allow you to have a +2 and a +1 that you decide where they go in your characters. So this is going to feel familiar, but what's different is now that we're working on revising the Player's Handbook itself, where those bonuses now live in this playtest material is in the background section.
And it makes sense because you've been doing this. This is your background. This is like the life that you have led.
Exactly.
This is why you are more dexterous. This is why you're stronger, because you lifted greatsword. Like
Yes.
you were a soldier. This kind of equates.
Exactly, because background is all about what have you been doing for all the years before you became an adventurer. It has a meaningful effect on your character's stats. And now if you choose one of the pre-made backgrounds, people will see we have chosen what those ability score bonuses are, connected to the story of the background. But if you use the default option, which is building your own, just as you can in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, you can put that +2 and that +1, or 3 +1s wherever you want, just as you can with Tasha's. And the reason why we're doing it sort of both ways, where if you do build your own, you decide where they go, or if you choose a pre-made background, we decide where they go, because we also know there are many players who don't want to have to decide. And so if you just I pick soldier, soldier tells me to increase these two stats in this way, and then they're good to go. It's sort of the best of both worlds.
Well, and it illustrates the point very well.
Yes. And really many of the backgrounds that we provide are really just illustrations of how people can use the new background building system. So ability scores are a part of it. You, just as you do now, in the 2014 Player's Handbook, you'll also get 2 skill proficiencies, you get a tool proficiency, you get a language, you also get a starting package of equipment, and even in our deconstruction and rebuilding process, even all those equipment packages have been examined, because we're embracing this build your own approach. One of the things we needed to do was make it so that all the backgrounds have equipment packages of the same value.
Yeah.
Because in the 2014 Player's Handbook, they didn't. So now if people add up how, the cost, they'll see, all the backgrounds have equipment packages worth exactly 50 gold pieces.
Instead of just going for criminal or noble.
Right.
Right.
And one of the main reasons why we've done that is to empower this build your own approach.
Yeah.
So then the other thing you get in your background, and we touched on it earlier in our talk, and it is, in my mind, the most exciting new piece of background, and that is you also get a first level feat. So in that statement, there are a few things for me to unpack. First off, I just talked about a feat and gave it a level. That's critical, because people are going to see, not only in this Unearthed Arcana, but in the upcoming Unearthed Arcanas over the next year plus, they're going to see feats appearing, and every feat will have a level on it. The way to think of a feat is essentially a class feature that doesn't belong to a single class. And just as class features have levels, feats are now going to have levels.
That makes a lot of sense.
And so there are several reasons for this. One, because we're really embracing feats in certain parts of this playtest process, backgrounds being one of the main parts of the game where we're doing that, we want to make sure that feat selection is not overwhelming. And one way for us to make it so that it's not overwhelming is to break feats up into smaller groups. And one of those ways that we're doing that is with levels. So for instance, if something in the game tells you, go pick a first level feat, then you know immediately, well then I can ignore all the feats in this book that are for 4th level, that are for 20th level, or any other level that might be on the feats. Instead, you can just focus in on the first level ones.
And this allows those universal traits that don't belong to any specific class to have a variance of power that feels like more in tune with your leveling up.
Exactly.
Like it allows you not to I'm just picking from the same pool of feats as I've always done. No, you can get a feat that is much more strong.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but also something people are going to see is that when you examine the first level feats in this Unearthed Arcana, if you're familiar with the feats that have been in the game in the last 8 years, some of them have, in addition to including some sort of special benefit, have often also included a +1 to one of your ability scores.
Right.
You'll notice reading this document, none of these feats have a +1 to an ability score. And that's intentional because that is actually one of the signs that you're looking at a first level feat. Because when you see some of the higher level feats in our upcoming Unearthed Arcanas, some of those feats will still have a +1 to a particular ability score. But again, one of the signs of a first level feat is they don't include that. And because first level feats are not meant to change your ability score, because when you're building your character, there are already other things that are manipulating your ability scores.
Right, those initial factors. Whereas when you move forward and you start hitting other levels, you are faced with the, do I increase my ability stats or do I go with a feat?
Right.
And this kind of softens that as well of like, well, you're still getting a benefit with some of these feats.
Well, you're not only getting a benefit, but it's a benefit your character didn't have before.
Right. Yeah.
This is a pure addition that we're providing now for everybody, and we have that in mind as we decide what qualifies as a first level feat and what doesn't. Basically, anything that's going to dramatically increase character power in some way, people are not going to see as a first level feat. That is the domain of higher level feats. Where the game's math can handle adjustments to raw power. Most first level feats are about increasing a character's versatility and speaking to different key backstories. And you'll see that these feats are, they all are featured in at least one of the sample backgrounds in this document. So you can also see, looking at the sample backgrounds, how to match first level feats with background if you decide to build your own background. And again, if you don't want to, you just grab one of these pre-made backgrounds and the background just feeds you a particular feat. For instance, if you pick the sailor, you're going to get Tavern Brawler. And the reason for that is because in the little story that we provide for the sailor, it's because on your long journeys, you have spent a whole lot of time in taverns, in different ports of call.
Yeah.
And in the process, you've gotten really good at participating in brawls.
Whereas like criminal, you get alert, I believe.
Yes.
Because that makes sense.
Yes, because you want to be very alert.
You gotta look out for the soldiers of the crown or whatever.
Exactly. And people are going to see that alert, which is a returning feat, has new functionality.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited about this whole approach that we're taking with backgrounds of it's all about building your character's story and making certain meaningful game mechanic choices that reflect the story you have in mind for your character. And each of the sample backgrounds that we provide are really there to inspire you, to show you the kinds of backstories that you can have for your character. So that's why you're going to see, again, not only some returning backgrounds like soldier, like sailor, acolyte, but you're also going to see brand new ones like cultist, pilgrim, and a number of others, all meant to show a different aspect of a character's life that could have been formative in who they are.
Yeah, and it's such a good, it helps for a point of inspiration how you role play your character as well.
Yeah.
And add like the meaningfulness of the backgrounds. Like backgrounds were always cool before, but now it's like, okay, this has oomph. A lot of oomph.
It has a lot of oomph because its background is also where you can express your character's culture, where your character is from. Some of those elements that used to exist in some of our character races, those elements now exist in background. that migration of sort of culturally encoded elements migrating to background is a philosophy that informs a number of the design decisions in this particular UA. It's why, for instance, to go back to one of our race options, if you look at the dwarf in this Unearthed Arcana, the dwarf does not have mountain dwarf and hill dwarf as sub-options anymore. And there's a reason for that. It's because those options were only cultural for dwarves. In our D&D worlds, those are really cultural designations that different dwarf communities have taken on. And also in some D&D worlds, those names don't appear at all.
Right, yeah.
And unlike, say, elves, who actually have different mystical abilities based on their connections with different environments, whether it's wood elves who have particular magical abilities because of their connection to primeval forests, or drow who have, their magical abilities because of the millennia they've spent in the magic-saturated Underdark. Dwarves don't have those associations. And so instead of having a choice which was, again, cultural, and culture now is reflected by background, we focused in on, let's make the dwarfiest dwarf. And so in a few cases where maybe before there's an option that's not there anymore, really often the option is just moved someplace else. And so any of the cultural cues that a person before was searching for in, say, their dwarf character, they can now replicate those, and often with more oomph in the background system. For instance, if you want to really lean into, the fairy tale dwarf who not only has all the characteristics we expect of a dwarf, but also is like a miner and this sort of thing, then I encourage people to go pick the laborer background, where you're going to get all the stuff you would expect for a character who's really leaning into that archetype.
This all connects to Monsters of the Multiverse as well.
Absolutely. So anything that you're seeing here is designed to play side by side with books you have already, and that includes recent books like Monsters of the Multiverse. So the dwarf, for instance, that you see in this Unearthed Arcana is meant to exist in the game side by side with the Dwergar that appears in Monsters of the Multiverse. The elf in this UA is designed to stand side by side with the sea elf, Eladrin, and Shatter Kai, who are in Monsters of the Multiverse. Same with gnomes, where we have the sort of the player's handbook gnome that we're looking at here, and then we have the additional gnome option of the deep gnome in Monsters of the Multiverse. So really, when you look at the player's handbook version of something, that is the most sort of like archetypal, universal version, the most common version that you're going to see. All of those other versions that we have, particularly in a book like Monsters of the Multiverse, which we designed to be a big collection of options that would then be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the options in the new core rulebooks, you then, when you put them all together, have this amazing family of options. And these new options don't take away those, but instead, in many ways, create some, when you look at one and look at the other, it really then highlights even more what's special about each of the options.
This playtest material is meant to work, and the future product, the future player's handbook, very nicely with the books that already exist.
Exactly. Now, there's a lot we could say about the feats that you're getting from those backgrounds.
Correct.
And I'm really excited for people to read through all of them, to see what's going on in these feats, rather than going through each one of them, as much as I would love to, because there's so many
there's a lot to look at.
There's so many fun things in these new feats. Really what I'd love to do is talk briefly about some of the philosophy behind the decision making here. I've already talked a bit about some of the things that distinguish a first level feat from higher level feats. There's another thing that informs some of the decisions we made about the feats here, and that is, first I'll talk about feats we revised, and then I'll also talk about brand new feats. So whenever we were revising a feat that already existed in the 2014 Player's Handbook and made the determination that it was going to become a first level feat, we not only wanted to make sure it was delivering something with very clear functionality and clear value, we also wanted to make sure that the feat is useful to the people who most archetypally would want to take it. Here's what I mean by that. If you look at the healer feat in the 2014 Player's Handbook, you read the title and you think, hey, I'm playing a life cleric, I'm a healer.
Right.
That's probably a feat I want to take. But then if you read it,
Not very beneficial.
no, because that feat was actually written for a person who maybe doesn't have any healing ability.
Right.
So we have kind of turned that on its head. And we have now made it so that this feat is beneficial to people who are already healers, while also providing a healing ability to somebody who lacks it. So that's the kind of the needle we're threading in a lot of these, that maybe a feat that before seemed to be calling to a particular type of character, but then didn't connect with that character at all. We have now made it so that it is beneficial for that kind of character. Like many life clerics are now going to want to take the healer feat. But then also many non-spellcasting characters, I think, might be drawn to the healer feat because of their character's backstory, because of the battle medic ability that is now in the healer feat that allows you to actually heal somebody using a healer's kit. And you'll see that again and again in these feats. Things that are either going to be beneficial for the individual character who we expect would be attracted to the feat, or beneficial to the whole party. Here's an example of that. In the alert feat, now first level feat that, again, the criminal has, not only do you get a bonus to your initiative roll, but you also now have an ability when initiative is rolled, you and another member of your party can swap initiative.
Which is amazing. I love it.
And that ability alone is going to make many groups like, oh, we are so happy if somebody has alert. Because we have all, playing D&D, been in that situation where, like, if only this particular character was able to go earlier.
Exactly, yeah.
And so now the character who is, because this alert feat is designed to mean this is the person who is exceptionally ready to jump into action and can help one of their buddies do so.
And that's another example of, like, alert was a very, like, for my character only feat.
Right.
Like I just want to be first.
Right.
Now you have the option to, like, pass that on to someone else in your group and be a good party member.
Exactly.
If given the option. But yeah, like that's lovely. That dual purpose for all these feats.
Yeah.
That's
And
nice.
then the brand new feats are designed to fill some character type gaps that existed before. Gaps that really came to mind for us as we were designing the sample backgrounds.
What's an example of one of the new feats?
So musician
Right.
is one of the new feats. And with the musician feat, you can not only gain proficiency with 3 musical instruments of your choice. And sort of getting 3 tool proficiencies used to be a function, one of the optional functions of the skilled feat. But now you get a more flavorful version of that, not only in the musician feat, but also elsewhere. So you get to choose 3 musical instruments that you're proficient with. But then you also have the ability that whenever you finish a short or long rest, you can give inspiration to a number of people who hear you play a song on one of your instruments And the number of people who can gain inspiration is affected by your proficiency bonus. So, in other words, the higher level you get,
It scales
the
rather
more,
nicely. Yeah.
And so, in any group, we're like, gosh, we'd really love to have sort of inspiration in our pocket, ready to go. And for anyone watching who doesn't know what inspiration is, because a lot of groups don't use it, that's essentially having advantage in your pocket, ready to use when you need it.
Right.
And so a person with the musician feat using this inspiring song can give people inspiration. So this brand new feat is not only filling a gap in our previous feat list, but it's also doing exactly what I was talking about earlier about the healer feat, and that is it will be useful to also someone who's already a musician, most notably the bard.
The bard, yeah.
Because this ability to, whenever you finish a rest, to give certain number of people of inspiration is not an ability the bard has. So this combines really nicely with a bard's kit.
Yeah. So you can become the most bardy bard, or you can play a fighter who also on occasion takes out a lute.
Yeah, who before battle plays this beautiful song and everyone is like, now I'm ready to go. Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah. And again, that is the philosophy here throughout, is how can we make people who, again, want a taste of something they don't have happy, but then also make the people who already have the thing also happy. Magic Initiate does this too. Magic Initiate, like some of the feats we've published in the past year or two, now tells you, hey, not only do you get some spells that you can cast for free, but if you already have spell slots, you can use them to cast these spells too.
And we saw this in the evolution of like Tasha's and other books where that you very much keyed into the fact of like, yeah, I got this first level spell, but like I can't upcast it with Magic Initiate.
Right.
So it's a little like frustrating if that spell can scale up if you like use a higher spell slot.
And now you can do that.
Yeah, if you want to hellish rebuke someone, which I
Right.
love doing, you can do so now.
The feat also has been given broader functionality because people are going to see in this feat a reference to something that is new.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about. I assume you were talking about spells and how they're defined.
Yes. So not only does the Magic Initiate feat refer to what we're about to talk about, but there are references to it elsewhere in the doc, one of those being in the High Elf, and that is we now refer to 3 new spell lists. There is an arcane spell list, a divine spell list, and a primal spell list. In our work over the last few years, as we've been preparing to start unveiling this material, we realized that as the game expands, as there are new subclass options, also with the introduction of a class like the Artificer, with feats, with magic items, with a variety of things that give you access to spells, there has been a growing need for us to have a new type of spell list, and that is a spell list that isn't tied to a particular class, but is instead tied to really the source of your magic.
Right.
And so in this case, arcane spells are all about manipulating the background magic that's in the entire multiverse. Divine spells, as people would expect, come from either gods or the realms of the gods. And then primal spells are about drawing on the magic that is in not only sort of the elements, but also in the spirits of nature. And the way we sort of divide it is divine is really magic pulling from the outer planes, primal is pulling from the inner planes, and arcane is pulling from sort of the multiverse writ large. And so now, rather than us directing you for certain spell choices in particular contexts, like the previous Magic Initiate was like, all right, go pick from the spell list of one of these particular classes, which then suddenly, the moment we introduce a new class like Artificer,
Right.
then we need a whole new feat for that.
Yeah.
This feat now grows with the future of the game, because now anytime that we introduce a spell, the spell itself will have for you a tag that tells you if it's arcane, divine, or primal, or a mix, because some spells, as people are going to see in some of our upcoming Unearthed Arcana, fall into multiple categories. This is going to have a tremendous payoff, not only for like, oh, this later supplement added a new arcane spell, I have access to the arcane spell list, I can now have access to that spell without it having to route through a particular class.
A much more elegant solution.
Yes, and it also is another, it has another purpose for us. It's a way for us to take this notion of these sources of magic, which are mentioned, at least arcane and divine are, in the 2014 Player's Handbook, but now we actually sort of give them rules teeth, rather than just sort of being a story wrapper, because arcane and divine and then occasionally primal when it has been mentioned have really just been a flavor wrapper. Now they actually have substance in the game itself, that there is a list that you can go look at and go, here are the sort of universal arcane spells, here are the universal divine spells, and so on. Now, people will have to wait for upcoming Unearthed Arcanas to see how classes use those lists, because classes are going to use those lists, but classes are also going to have access to spells that go beyond those universal lists. But again, that's for future us to talk about. But again, I think already this is super exciting. Being able to reveal these new types of spell lists that provide a tremendous amount of flexibility for characters, not only that will be able to be made with this series of Unearthed Arcana articles, but also that will be able to be made in the future.
Yeah, it is a very exciting time. This is a very weighty UA. We're going to be doing this often this year. Somewhat semi-monthly, but yeah, not necessarily strictly defined.
Yeah.
In terms of timing, but we have a lot of UAs coming out this year. We need a lot of player feedback. So.
And there is so much in this UA that we could talk about.
Yes, I know. We could have gone through everything, and we could have made this a 3-hour video.
And there are, before we sign off on this video, there are a couple other gems in this UA I would love to
Go ahead. Yeah, I'm eager to hear.
So first, I encourage people in the rules glossary to look at not only the revised definitions of a couple of our conditions, they're also going to see there's a new condition that's in play, the slowed condition, and people are going to see in the upcoming Unearthed Arcanas updates to a number of the game's conditions, so I'm excited to see what people think about that. Also, I encourage people to take a look at the new rules for inspiration, because we've decided that rather than inspiration being connected to essentially just the DM awarding people for particular character choices, instead, inspiration is going to be something you can reliably get whenever you roll a 20 on an ability check, saving throw, or attack roll. We wanted a way to feed people inspiration through the system itself. And we love this idea of when you have a spectacular success, you're inspired by it. You're bolstered by it, and that can start creating this sort of snowball effect.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going for. We've also tweaked the rule on inspirations so that it's still the same, that you can only ever have one instant of inspiration. You don't get to stockpile inspiration. It's that you either have it or you don't. But we've now made it so that if something in the game gives you inspiration and you already have it, you can then immediately give it to one of the other characters in your group.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it's likely that people are going to have it because you get it by rolling a 20. And one of the new traits of humans in the game is humans, whenever they finish a long rest, have inspiration.
Interesting.
So every human in your group is going to start every adventuring day with inspiration. And that means then if the human gets inspiration and already has it, they can then give inspiration to somebody else. I think there's going to be a really fun sort of, inspiration flowing around in the party. And what people are going to see as they actually experience this in play, what the system is intentionally doing is encouraging you to use the inspiration because there's more is coming.
Instead of just like greedily, like, I don't know when I'm going to need this.
Exactly. And it's we often, when we're assessing different parts of the system, if we see something that ends up getting hoarded so much that it actually almost never sees use, that to us tells we need to change something so that this actually becomes a fun part of play and not something that just gets marked on your character sheet and then you forget about it.
Is this the moment that I use it? That kind of almost anxiety. Like,
right.
Like I've been in so many, you and I have been in so many one-shots where it's like, well, I never used it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's gone forever.
Whereas we want to make it easy for people to say yes.
Yeah.
To say, yes, I'm going to use my inspiration because it's likely more is coming right around the corner.
The getting a natural 20 thing is so exciting because that's such a cinematic moment or a great narrative moment of like, I've been very successful and now I have a little bit left over and you could roll another 20. It could keep going and going and going. And to see a game where like something like that happens. I mean, the odds are not high, but they're higher now to see something that kind of amazing at the table. Yeah, that's very very fun. So critical hits have changed as well. Can you elaborate on that?
We are experimenting in this Unearthed Arcana with a new take on the critical hit. So in addition to rolling a 20, now feeding you inspiration, whether it's an ability check, saving throw, or attack roll, we've now specified that if it's an attack roll and you roll a 20, it's also a critical hit as you would expect. But what's different here is it's only a critical hit if you were attacking with a weapon or an unarmed strike. Now, in most cases in our game, that was already the case in actual play. Because most spells in the game trigger saving throws rather than involving an attack roll, spells scoring critical hits was a more sort of rare occurrence than weapons scoring them. But we're exploring this option, and again, I really want to emphasize, this is a great example of a playtest giving us the chance to experiment with something.
Remember, this is not set in stone. This is playtest.
Exactly. We want to see what does the community think and how does this play out for them? Because what we're really trying to do is carve out a clearer space for essentially spell operations on one side and weapon and unarmed strike operations on the other. And the critical hit was already confusing for a number of people because I've actually lost count over the last 8 years the number of times I've been asked by the community, can spells score a critical hit? So funnily, this experiment in this UA will function for many groups the way they were already playing, because many groups had doubt that spells could actually critical, even though they could.
Right.
And so now we're experimenting with, well, just what if they can't? And this is a function of weapon use and unarmed strike use, which then also allows for us to do greater clarity, because then there's not that fuzziness before of like, take the dice that were involved in the attack and roll them twice. No, now we zoom way in. It's take the weapon or the unarmed strikes dice and roll them a second time. Now, of course, people know that some people don't have dice for their unarmed strikes, but monks and others absolutely do, and we wanted to make sure this critical hit option was available for them, in addition to characters who rely more on weapons. Now, there's an additional nuance here. the way we have worded this experimental rule, it is only player characters who score critical hits. Now, I need to unpack that.
Well, it's kind.
So first, critical hits for monsters often play out in strange, unsatisfying, or terrifying ways, and I'll unpack those. First, they can be terrifying. Higher level, terrifying is fine. First level, terrifying can mean the character's gone. So crits are extremely dangerous at low levels for player characters. You know, that bugbear critting your first level character might mean
That's it.
your character is on their way to the grave.
Yeah.
But then other times, because of how a monster's damage expression is built, a monster critical hit can feel unsatisfying. And the DM might say there was a crit, but the math doesn't really deliver the punch that you were expecting when the DM said that. Also, because a lot of DMs use static damage, our crit roll, where you're rolling a die a second time, there's friction between that rule and how monsters are actually designed. And then there's a further reason that we're experimenting with this, and that is monsters actually already have their own built-in crit-like mechanic, and that is the recharge mechanic. We use recharge abilities to deliver those scary, massive strikes.
Right.
Think of the Dragon's Breath weapon. When that happens, everyone is put on notice, and that is the scary moment. The DM decides when to use it. So the DM can make an informed decision when to crank up the difficulty in a battle. The DM has no control over a critical hit. Now, uncertainty is also fun because we like DMs being surprised, but that's where the recharge roll comes in, because the DM, once the DM decides to essentially press the things are going to get real button.
They get the button back.
They're not sure when they get the button back.
Yeah.
And so there is already this element of uncertainty purposefully built into the recharge mechanic. And so what we're exploring is this notion of really monsters don't need crits because they have crits in another form, and that is in recharge abilities. And those the DM has a bit more control over, even though it's not total control, because again, once used, the DM doesn't know when it's coming back. That modicum of control is more in keeping with what we expect for a dungeon master. And so we're exploring the crit as essentially a special ability of player characters, of occasionally they score these surprisingly good hits that deal more damage than the weapon or unarmed strike would normally deal. This is a rule I am very keen to get feedback on, and hope people will try it out in their game. And then we'll see where we go next once we get the feedback on it. Related to rolling the D20, there's also another significant thing in the rules glossary that I encourage people to take a look at. And that is, we have decided to embrace how many groups actually play. And that is, when you roll a 1 or a 20 for an ability check, saving throw, or attack roll,
Right.
a 1 is an automatic failure and a 20 is an automatic success. It will surprise some people watching that that's a change, because
I know, because I've been doing it, I don't know, for like 10 years.
Yes.
At least.
Because for anyone who might not know, previously a 20 meaning an automatic success and a 1 meaning an automatic failure was only a function of the attack roll,
Right.
not of ability checks and saving throws. But what we have seen over the last 8 years is more and more groups use that rule for all of the D20 tests. And we decided, rather than having the rules being in friction with how people actually play the game, let's update the rules so that the game plays the way people expect it to.
Well, that's what's so much of was in this first playtest material is much of that,
Yes.
of how people actually play or want to play.
Because we, over the last 8 years, through the many surveys that people have filled out that have been valuable to our work, we've been listening. We've been paying attention. We watch streamed games. We constantly play D&D. And all of that feedback, all of that play, all of that observation has fed into what people are seeing in this Unearthed Arcana and what they're going to see in the months ahead.
There's two sides of the playtest material. Like, this is a moment in time where like all of everyone's feedback has led to this playtest material, and your feedback after this is going to lead to the final version. So be sure to playtest.
Absolutely.
Because this is not the final version.
Everything here is subject to change. This is really, this UA in particular is our hello.
Yeah, hello, we're listening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And the feedback that then the community provides in response will help determine what parts of this make it into the new core books, what parts do we set to the side, and what parts do we keep but change. And so what everyone is going to see, just like with the D&D Next process almost 10 years ago, you're going to see an evolution in these playtest materials, in the game itself. Also, the exciting thing, I think, for everyone is you're going to be able to use all of these playtest docs with your existing core books. We have designed these docs so that you can take each one, and other than the places where we tell you, all right, you know that thing in your book? Well, here's an update to it. Otherwise, all this material works with the core books you already have. Meaning, the UAs that are ahead will be very targeted, rather than it being like, here is a cross-section of the entire game.
Right.
Instead, we're going to drill into one piece, because that piece will now work with the books you have already. And so that's why, in coming ones, we're going to drill deep on particular classes, and then eventually we'll drill deep on particular spells as we build this. It's almost like we're building a mosaic that in the end, once all the pieces are in place, you will get a glimpse of what the new core books are going to look like.
This has to be very exciting for you. Like, beyond the rules and the playtest, this is like a very exciting time to be a D&D fan.
Yeah.
And to be making D&D.
Yeah. No, it's wonderfully exciting because we're able to take something that we love, feed the passion that we in the community have had for it over the last 8 years, feed all the conversations we've had internally that we've had with fans out in the world, and take all of that and let it flow into the game itself so that it can move now into its next generation.
That's perfect. I'm very excited for this video and for many more to come over the next few years.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. And people will get access to this UA on dndbeyond.com.
Yes.
That is also where you get to playtest. And that will be coming out sometime after this video first lands. So for this particular one, later today, you should get access to that. I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're not going to be busy at all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.